Welcome to Quantum RX, the podcast that teaches you how to move beyond stuck emotions and trauma for mind, body, and spirit healing. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. So, in the media and especially social media today, you might be hearing lots about, parts work. And that is usually in reference to the internal family systems framework and model, which we'll get into that a little bit later. But, it talks about how you have an internal family system of protectors that is really trying to help you kind of manage and cope emotionally so that you can get through life. So in my world, I have learned about this. I am not a, trained practitioner of internal family systems, or even I would say this kind of also gets into the Jungian ideas too, right? The Carl Jung's, his teachings too, because he had the different archetypes, right? And again, that kind of harkens to the different parts and pieces of ourselves, right? And a lot of times people are looking for this and looking to these models to understand themselves. It's the same kind of idea as looking at your, like Myers-Briggs personality types or your human design. These are all pieces of the puzzle that can help us kind of figure out who we are and give us a way to look at the world, but also how to interact with other people. So interacting with your internal world and then also interacting with other people. But what I do find in my work is that there are some parts of ourselves that show up pretty frequently, and they can be, sometimes they can hold us back. And so we're going to dive into that type of stuff today. We're going to dive into who are these parts of you? Why do you have all of these parts? And 2 exercises to start connecting with these parts. Because once you know that you have these parts, it's very helpful just on an understanding level to really connect with your parts and, just have the dialogue, have the conversation, because it's a really good way of, again, feeling emotions and understanding yourself and having compassion for yourself and having good self-leadership and then leadership with others. If you're curious as to if you have any stored emotions or trauma that might be causing your illness, preventing you from achieving your goals, or even just showing up as the best, most authentic version of yourself, I invite you to take my free stored emotions and trauma quiz, and you will find that link in the show notes. So let's dive in to, the parts of you. So in my work, I tend to work a lot more with your inner child. And like I said before, there is the internal family systems, and the main player in that is yourself. It's the you that's not a part. It shows up as, your curiosity, creativity, connectedness, compassion, confidence, all of the different parts of you, even the other parts that are, you would perceive societally, you would call it negative, but it's not, the parts that have the fears and other pieces. And that's where like the parts of internal family systems, like using that as a framework can be helpful, because it gives you your managers, your firefighters, and your exiles. And so managers, I'll just give you a quick recap of what those are. It's like your proactive parts, right? Just like as if you were managing life. They try to keep you safe by controlling other parts of you, people in your life or yourself and situations, like the types of things that you might think of with the manager. It's like criticism, especially self-criticism, those feedback loops that we have playing in our heads. Planning, caretaking, feeling numb, like tuning yourself out or just suppressing things, suppressing emotions and feelings, pessimism, judgment, that all kind of falls into the manager role. And the next one would be firefighter. The firefighters are the reactive ones. Instead of being proactive, it's reactive. They're the ones who swoop in when your body or your system is at a risk of overwhelm. And that might show up as things like substance abuse, self-harm, rage, even suicidal ideation could fall into this, binging, dissociating, all of those things that are very reactive to the external environment, right? And then you have the exiles, and the exiles are younger parts that hold trauma, pain, fear, and shame, and they are typically shut away to keep themselves safe, but they also try to stop the system from having overwhelm, if that makes sense. Like I said, in my work, I work a lot with where you would call this the exile. In my framework, I would call it the inner child. And so that's where I wanted to talk about, like, even just the different parts. There's lots of different labels. Like I had mentioned before, in the Jungian system, there are all different kinds of, archetypes and shadows. And then there are personas and the masks that we wear. These are all just essentially different versions of a similar idea, trying to give ourselves understanding. What I will say is that, like I said before, in my work, the inner child is a big piece of the puzzle. And I just want to dial back for one quick second. Like, why do we have all these parts and why do we even talk about it, right? We talk about it to give understanding and context and meaning to all of the things, kind of the emotional and energetic soup that we have in our bodies. And life is confusing, sometimes very, very hard. And understanding and having a relationship with many of these parts, and it makes our life a little bit easier. And like I said, in my work, I typically see inner child stuff happen quite a lot, and then wounded healer. And it's interesting because when people hear wounded healer often does refer to somebody. I would be a perfect example of wounded healer, because for me, I was trying to solve my own problems, which is why I got into the healing arts. And what's interesting is I wanted to be a doctor since I was a little kid. First started off, wanted to be a veterinarian, and animals can't talk. That was when I was around 7 or 8 years old. And then I was like, okay, I want to be a doctor. But that has always been stirring within me, that desire to help or desire to heal. So that was, obviously when I was little, didn't realize that I had stuff that needed to be healed. And on the first part of my journey, that showed up as fixing biochemistry and fixing physiology. But really, in essence, I really needed to fix the emotions. I shouldn't say fix. I hate that term, especially because we are not broken. We are perfectly imperfect. And a lot of the work that I do is bringing you back to you. What was always in there, we're drawing that out. And so a lot of times all of that stuff gets buried under the layers of emotions and trauma and all of the things that life has given us. And as we remove those layers and, peel them back, the you that was always there can emerge. And that's something that I like to tell people. And I have a lot of passion about, because we aren't broken and we don't need to be fixed. So I want to kind of recant what the phrasing that I just used. So, right, I had to shift my biochemistry and my physiology, but then I realized that that helped a little bit, and I really needed to do the emotional release and the trauma work for me to fully heal and fully embody my true, confident, authentic self. And so, like I said, most of this is transformation. It's transforming energy, right? And so we do have these parts. The parts are there to protect us, quote unquote, protect us. And it's also just a good framework to understanding who you are. And lots of times the wounded healer shows up when it's not getting what it needs or getting attention. And also the inner child. They're very, very similar in that way, at least in the way that I view things. The inner child comes up when it's feeling hurt and scared. And so one thing that I invite people to do is we're going to go through 2 exercises. Just, sometimes when you're laying in bed at night, right before you fall asleep, you have the ability to kind of connect with a different level of your consciousness. And when you're doing that, I would invite you to, just say, hey, hey, inner child, I know you're in there. If there's anything that you want me to know about you or things that we need to work on, please just let me know. Because lots of times when you plant that seed right before you go into a more, subconscious state when you're sleeping, those things can come to the surface and you're conscious, and you might get that as a download, or something might pop into your head, right? You might have this idea that pops into your head that you're like, where did that come from? And that is your subconscious mind connecting with you. So you can connect with it in that way. You can also, if you are doing any trauma work or emotional release work or anything, in that realm, any of the many modalities, when you're in that work and when you're in that space, connect with your inner child. I do this with the people I work with in multiple ways, but the most common way is when we do a regression. We ask for all of the, past versions of you that have felt a certain way. And a lot of times the inner child will come out in those moments. And there are things that we do to help heal the inner child or heal wounds that the inner child might have. So it's not languaging that I use like all the time, but sometimes when the moment presents itself and we're in a session and it's clear that there is a big wound there, we work on that. And sometimes I actually say, hey, let's talk to your inner child. Sometimes I don't. I very much go through my process intuitively. And, what does that person need? What does that person need to experience to give that, inner child or those wounds healing, or the subconscious mind satisfaction that what we're working on is truly healing and it's the subconscious mind is satisfied. So those are some ways that you can start to work with your inner child. You could even, like, if you feel the urge, you can talk to your inner child and just be like, hey, I see you. I acknowledge you. I thank you for, serving me all of this time. I appreciate that you're trying to protect me, but also there are things that we need to shed. In the previous episode, we talked a lot about the shedding process and what it is. There are things that are no longer serving us that we need to release. And you can tell your inner child that it's okay to release what's not serving you. I would say, thank you, inner child, for protecting me from whatever it is. Like you could say emotional distress, like any kind of emotional distress that you might be having. But, that's not serving us anymore. And I release it with love, and we release it with love. So that's just a little exercise that you could do too. But just talk with your inner child, dialogue, get familiar, and you will start to have things come to the surface. And if it's something that you can work through yourself, great. If it's something that you need to, reach out to somebody else and ask for help, do that too, because there is so much power in asking for help. So I encourage you to do that. And if you have any experience with your own parts or parts work or any thoughts that you'd love to share, I'd love to hear it in the comments below. And as always, sending you all lots of love, and until next time.
If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness, and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.